What do you do when your wife gets drunk at your anniversary dinner and casually admits she has been cheating with her ex, while everyone laughs and waits to see how you will react? How far can a calm husband go, using only notes, dates, and quiet planning after she tells the story again and again as a joke at his expense? Why does the real answer arrive not that night at the restaurant, but weeks later in a bright office lobby where someone finally says her full name and hands her an envelope? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Alden Marlowe, and for most of our marriage, I believe that if I stayed steady, worked hard, and kept our home calm, then the storms outside would never reach us, even when I began to see small cracks forming in places people usually choose not to look. Those cracks started as tiny moments in our apartment kitchen, on ordinary mornings when I made coffee and packed our daughter Lena's lunch while my wife, Tessa, sat at the table with her phone in her hand, smiling at something I could not see. She would tilt her head, bite her lip, and let out a soft laugh that did not belong to the room we were in. And when I asked what was so funny, I tried to sound casual, almost curious, not accusing. She said it was just a meme, just the group chat, just old friends, and she made it sound like my question was heavy, like I was dragging the mood down by simply noticing that her smile had started to live in another world. A few days later, when I passed behind her chair on the way to the sink, I saw a name at the top of the screen for just a second, long enough for my brain to grab it before she swiped the notification away. It was Colin, the ex-boyfriend from university she sometimes talked about when she wanted to remind herself that she used to be wild. Tessa had always described him as reckless but exciting, someone who did not care about rules or plans, a person she outgrew when she chose a quieter life with me, and I honestly believed her when she said that, because back then there was no reason not to. Now, seeing his name glowing on her screen first thing in the morning, I felt a small, sharp sting under my ribs, but I stayed where I always stay, behind my calm face, and asked nothing more. That evening, in the master bedroom, she lay on her side with her back to me, the blue light from her phone filling the dark as she typed with quick, sure movements. And when I shifted slightly to stretch my legs, she told me I had changed. She said I had become too predictable, too safe, that I never surprised her anymore. And even though she did not say his name, I could feel the shape of Colin standing between us, made from old memories and new messages. I reminded her, in a gentle tone, that stability was not a crime, that I worked long days to make sure she and Lena had what they needed, and she replied indirectly that some people needed more than bills paid and dinners cooked, that they needed to remember who they were before they became someone's spouse. I did not tell her that I also remembered who I was before this, a man who did not walk on eggshells in his own kitchen, because there was no room for that kind of honesty in the space she had turned into a stage. After Lena went to bed, I moved to the small corner of our living room that I use as a home office, just a simple desk with my laptop and a notepad, and I opened a blank spreadsheet without really knowing why. My work in compliance has trained me to see patterns in lines and dates, to notice when small numbers start to lean in a strange direction, and my fingers acted almost on their own as I typed 3 letters at the top of a column. CM, his initials. In the rows beneath, I entered simple things, nothing dramatic, just the day and time I had noticed his name on her phone, the time she said she was catching up with an old friend, the moment she laughed during dinner at a message she would not show me. If someone had looked over my shoulder, it would have just looked like any other boring list I make for work. But when Tessa walked past on her way to the bedroom and asked what I was doing, I minimized the window with one tap and said I was finishing something for the office. She accepted that answer without another question, because in her mind my work is dull and harmless, something that could never touch the bright, messy emotions she is chasing. Later, in the kitchen, I stood in front of the wall planner where we keep family dates and school events, and I took a red pen from the drawer. Our anniversary was already written in black from months before, but now I drew a careful circle around it, pressing a little harder than usual, so the red ring stood out among the other normal marks. Lena walked in for a glass of water and asked why I was drawing on the calendar, and I smiled and said that big dates deserve big circles, which made sense to her, so she nodded and went back to bed. After she left, I took a regular pencil and made a much smaller dot on another day a couple of weeks later. No label, no explanation, just a mark only I understood. At night, when the apartment grew quiet and Tessa's laughter drifted from the bedroom where she was still on her phone, I stepped out onto the balcony, letting the cool air clear my head. The city lights flickered below, each window holding a different life that I would never know, and I took my own phone from my pocket, scrolling through my contacts until I reached one saved simply as private. It was a number someone at work had given me months ago, a person you call when you need to understand processes, not when you want revenge, and my thumb hovered over the call button for a few long seconds. I did not press it that night. Instead, I added a simple note in my phone's reminder app that said, "Meeting, personal, not tied to a date yet," just floating there like a thought waiting for shape. When I finally came back inside, Tessa had fallen asleep with the phone still in her hand, the screen dark now, and I gently placed it on her nightstand, feeling like a stranger in my own room. I put my own phone down, planning to set an alarm for work, and that was when a new alert slid across the top of the screen on its own, syncing from our shared email account. It was a calendar reminder for a place I had never heard her mention before, scheduled for the same week as our anniversary, titled Harbor Bistro, 8:15 p.m., and I lay there in the dark, staring at those words until the screen dimmed, wondering when our marriage had become a story where I was the only one who did not know the twist. In the days leading up to that red-circled date on our wall, my life at the office became the place where Tessa's version of our story arrived before I did, wrapped in filters and captions that made my face feel like it belonged to someone else. I walked into the open-plan floor on Monday morning with my usual slow, steady steps, thinking about a report I needed to finish, only to find my coworker Dylan already rolling his chair toward my desk with his phone held out like a gift. On the screen, I saw a photo Tessa had posted late the previous night, one I had not noticed before I fell asleep. It was an old picture of her and Colin at some university party, their faces younger, their eyes bright with that reckless excitement people like to remember when they feel tired in the present. The caption said something about how some people never forget their first real love, and there was a winking emoji at the end, the kind that is supposed to make everything playful and harmless. Dylan laughed and said my wife had a wild side I must find exhausting, then asked if we planned to invite this legendary ex to our anniversary dinner for extra drama, as if the whole thing were a reality show we were producing. I kept my face calm and told him, in a light voice, that Tessa liked nostalgia and that old photos made her feel young, which was true, even if it was not the full truth. After he rolled away, still chuckling, I opened my laptop and brought up the spreadsheet I had created at home, now saved in a discrete folder with a forgettable name. I added another line beneath the first rows, the date of the post, a short description of the caption, and the names of everyone I knew had liked or commented, including Tessa's mother, Margaret, who had written that some loves never die, even when life takes you another way. I let those words sit in the cell for a moment, then minimized the sheet when my manager, Amelia, walked by and asked if I had time later for a quick word about a policy review. Her tone was normal, businesslike, and I answered that of course I did, my voice as calm as if my marriage had not just been turned into a joke in the next cubicle. Later, in the office kitchen, I poured coffee while two colleagues by the microwave talked about Tessa's storytime posts, saying they wished their own anniversaries had that kind of chaos, because at least it meant there was passion. And one of them said I seemed too quiet for someone married to a woman like that, almost as if I did not deserve her energy, and I stirred my coffee slowly, listening but pretending not to, filing their exact words away in the same mental drawer where I kept everything else. That evening, after work, Tessa convinced me to stop at the supermarket with her because we were almost out of basic things, and Lennon needed snacks for school. The bright aisles felt strangely fake under the buzzing lights, like a set built for a show instead of a real place where people bought bread and milk, and Tessa seemed to enjoy the way people's eyes followed her. At the checkout, the cashier recognized her and smiled broadly, saying she had seen the anniversary countdown posts and could not wait to see what crazy story Tessa would share from the big night. Tessa grinned and said she had something very honest planned, that she was tired of boring couple posts and wanted to show people what real love looked like, even if some people could not handle it. The cashier looked at me then, maybe for the first time, and there was a small flicker of pity in her eyes before she clicked the total. I pulled out my wallet and reached automatically for our joint card, then paused and slid it back into the slot, choosing instead to pay with my personal card, the one only my salary touched. When Tessa noticed, she frowned and asked in a half-teasing tone if I was hiding money from her, still playing to the invisible audience she now carried everywhere, but I answered evenly that I just wanted clearer lines around our spending, especially with so many parties and events happening. She rolled her eyes and said I was acting like a bank manager instead of a husband, and I let the words pass through me without grabbing onto them, because I knew that arguing in front of strangers would only become another chapter in the story she told later. That night, after Lena was asleep and Tessa was in the bedroom choosing dresses for our anniversary dinner, I stepped out onto the balcony again, needing the open air more than ever. The sky above the city was a dull gray, and the wind was light, carrying the faint sounds of traffic and music from somewhere down the street, everyday noise that had nothing to do with me. I took out my phone and opened a message thread I had started a few days earlier, one I had titled Follow Up, not with anyone else, just with myself, as a place to store short notes that I might need later, I typed a few lines about the supermarket, about the cashier's comment, about the way Tessa talked about real love and boring couples, then added the date and time before closing the app. My thumb slid to my photo gallery and I checked the saved images again, making sure the screenshot of the old picture with Colin was there, along with a new one I had quietly taken of Margaret's comment under Tessa's post. A small notification appeared at the top of the screen for a moment, telling me that a backup had completed, that my photos had been synced, and I watched the words "file" uploaded successfully before they disappeared, almost like a whisper. I went back inside and found Tessa standing in the kitchen, holding 2 dresses against her body and asking which one made her look more like herself, which one felt more like the girl she used to be when she was with Colin and did not care about consequences. I told her indirectly that she looked like herself in both, that what mattered was how she wanted to feel, not who she wanted to impress, and she snorted that I always spoke in riddles when things got serious. Later, when she finally went to bed, she left her phone on the nightstand while she brushed her teeth, and a new notification slid onto the screen with no lock symbol showing. It was from a group chat I recognized from her earlier stories, one with a private name full of inside jokes, and at the top I saw a small preview of a new message Kara had just posted. My own name was tagged below a blurred screenshot of Tessa's old photo with Colin, and the caption over it said, "Imagine being the husband watching this countdown," with laughing reaction icons already stacking underneath. I did not pick up her phone. I only watched the preview fade, and then I reached for my own device on my side of the bed. A second later, my screen lit up with the same group chat ping, because someone had decided to tag me there too, pulling me into a circle I had never asked to join. And as the little icon bounced for my attention, I knew that whatever happened on our anniversary would not stay between us, not anymore. Our anniversary dinner took place on a Friday night, the kind of evening the city dresses up for, with lights reflected in restaurant windows and streams of people moving toward places that promise special memories, not quiet endings. We arrived at the rooftop restaurant a little late because Tessa had spent an extra 30 minutes at home deciding between dresses, holding each one up in front of the mirror and asking which version of herself she should bring to the night. She finally chose the one that looked closest to the old university photographs, a dress that sent a clear message to anyone who had seen those posts. And when we stepped out of the elevator into the warm glow of the dining room, she walked ahead of me as if stepping onto a stage she had been rehearsing for. Our table faced the glass wall, with a clear view of the city skyline, and for a few minutes things were almost normal. We ordered drinks, talked about Lena's school project, and listened to the soft music that floated under the conversations around us. Then Tessa's phone buzzed on the table, lighting up with a group chat notification, and everything shifted slightly, the way a painting looks different when someone changes a single color in the corner. She glanced at the screen, smiled in a way that had nothing to do with me, and said that Kara and a few friends were nearby, that they wanted to stop in for a toast because nobody believed she could have a quiet anniversary dinner. I reminded her gently that I had thought the evening was just for us, and she answered indirectly that our marriage had felt quiet for too long anyway, that a little noise would not kill it, that people were curious about how much I could handle. She ordered another cocktail before finishing the first, then a third, and her voice grew louder with each sip, spilling stories across the table the way the drinks spilled across the rim of her glass. She began telling the waiter and anyone who would listen that this was our 10-year mark, that 10 years was a long time to pretend everything was perfect, and she suggested that real love meant telling the truth even when it hurt, even when people stared. When Kara arrived with 2 friends and a small camera already in her hand, she announced that the night needed a proper toast, not a fake, polite one, and she pulled another table close so that everyone could sit in a half circle facing us like an audience. I sat in my chair with my hands around my glass of water, watching as Tessa leaned into the attention, gesturing broadly and skipping over the gentle parts of our story so she could land on the messy ones. She told them that I had always been the stable one, the careful one, the man with spreadsheets in his head and rules in his pockets, and the group laughed because it sounded like a prepared line, which it probably was. Then she turned the story sideways, talking about how there had been a time in her life when she felt truly alive, when she had been with someone who never asked her to slow down or plan ahead, and she said that sometimes she wondered if she had taken a wrong turn by choosing safety over passion. Someone at the table, half joking and half serious, told her to name this mysterious person, and Kara lifted her phone a little higher, the red recording light glowing at the top of the screen while she encouraged Tessa to tell the internet what real honesty looks like. The name Colin came out of Tessa's mouth with a laugh that tried to make the word light but failed, because there was a heaviness in the air now that no one could ignore. She said that everyone already knew he was her first real love, that she had posted old photos and written about how he understood her in ways nobody else did, and she explained that it had not stayed in the past the way people assumed. She admitted, in the same breath that was supposed to be a joke, that she had been seeing him again, that it started as coffee and turned into something more, that our anniversary felt like the right night to stop hiding and be brutally honest with the man who had kept the bills paid while she tried to remember who she was. The table reacted with a mixture of gasps and nervous laughter, some people covering their mouths, others clapping in that strange way people clap when they do not know which side they are supposed to be on. Tessa looked at me across the table, her eyes bright and restless, waiting for a dramatic reaction that would prove I still cared enough to explode. And when I did not, she began to paint herself as the brave one. She told them I had grown cold, that I never surprised her, that Colin reminded her that she was still desirable, and she suggested that maybe the real sin in a marriage was not cheating, but letting the passion die. I listened without interrupting, because every word she spoke was another line on the timeline forming in my head, another entry for the sheet waiting quietly in my laptop at home. When she mentioned specific times, like the afternoon she said she was meeting an old friend near the harbor, or the evening she claimed she was staying late at work, I recognized the dates she named as the ones I had already written down under CM. I felt my heart thud against my ribs, not with the urge to shout, but with the feeling of puzzle pieces finally clicking together in a pattern I could no longer ignore. At some point I stood up and said, in a level voice, that I needed a moment of air, but I did not tell her whether I was leaving or staying. I simply walked toward the hallway that led to the restrooms and the emergency exit, hearing the noise of the table continue behind me. In the quiet of the hallway, the music from the main room softened to a dull hum, and I leaned against the wall for a few seconds, letting my breathing slow. Then I took out my phone and opened the app where Kara had recently posted a story from the table, a short clip where Tessa, already unsteady, declared that of course she had been seeing Colin again, as if it were a surprise to no one but me. The clip had just appeared in the small circle at the top of the screen, tagged with our anniversary date and a joking caption about the night getting too real, and I pressed the save icon with my thumb, watching the progress ring turn slowly until the app confirmed that the video had been stored. I forwarded it to a folder I had created earlier that week, labeled in a plain way that would not attract attention, and as soon as I saw the quiet message saying that the file had been uploaded, I closed the screen and returned to the dining room. When I reached the table, the atmosphere had shifted again. Someone had ordered more drinks, and a few people were zoning out, but the core of the story still hung in the air. Tessa laughed loudly when she saw me, telling the group that the serious man had come back from his walk of shame, and she asked if I would finally react like a real husband who still loved his wife. I answered indirectly, saying that I had heard enough to understand that our marriage was not what I thought it was, and that we would talk later when she was sober, and my calm tone made her roll her eyes and tell everyone that I did not know how to be dramatic, even when handed the perfect script. When the night wound down, I signaled the waiter and asked for the bill, paid it with my personal card again, and slipped the receipt into my wallet without comment. Tessa wanted to go to another bar with Kara and her friends, saying the night was still young and full of possibilities, and she urged me to come so I could prove I was not as stiff as people said. I declined and suggested she go with them if she wanted to celebrate more, adding that someone needed to be clear-headed for Lena in the morning, and she waved me off, declaring that I could play responsible parent alone for once. I ordered a car for her and Kara through the app, confirmed that it had arrived, and then requested a separate ride for myself, standing on the sidewalk outside the restaurant with the city lights reflecting in the glass doors. As my car pulled away, my phone vibrated again with a notification that Kara had just uploaded another private story titled "When the Anniversary Confession Hits," and I opened it long enough to see my own face in the background, expression steady while everyone around me reacted. I saved that clip too, almost automatically, before the driver turned onto the main road and the restaurant disappeared behind us, taking our old version of marriage with it. The morning after the rooftop dinner, the apartment smelled faintly of perfume and stale alcohol, a sickly mix that clung to the air even after I opened the kitchen window to let in the cool light. I woke early because Lena never sleeps past 7 on weekends, and when she padded into the kitchen rubbing her eyes, I made her pancakes and tried to keep my movements as ordinary as possible, knowing that children notice changes more through tone than through words. Tessa was still asleep in the bedroom, one arm thrown across the empty half of the bed where I would normally lie, and I could hear her uneven breathing down the hallway. Lena asked if Mommy had had a fun party for our anniversary, because she had seen a picture on Kara's phone showing balloons and glasses clinking, and I felt my throat tighten for a brief second before I answered that Mommy had had a very busy night and needed extra rest. Later, when Tessa finally came into the kitchen, her hair tangled and eyes swollen, she groaned and said that her head felt like it had been smashed, then asked in a flat voice how bad things had gotten. I told her, in simple, controlled terms, that she had told the table she had been seeing Colin again, and that people had recorded it, and that her sister had already posted clips. Tessa pressed her fingers to her temples and said she barely remembered, that she had been performing for the room, that it had been mostly jokes blown out of proportion by alcohol and cameras, and she insisted that I was being dramatic for treating her words like a courtroom transcript. She admitted that she had met Colin a few times, but she tried to frame it as an emotional slip, as nostalgia, as a story that did not deserve the word affair, and when I did not agree immediately, she accused me of turning one drunk moment into a reason to abandon her. I did not shout or call her names. Instead, I told her that the timeline she had described in her performance matched dates I had already noticed, and that my problem was not just with what she said while drunk, but with what had led up to it. She rolled her eyes and said only a man who worked in compliance would try to turn his marriage into a list of incidents, then announced that she would shower and meet her mother for lunch to clear her head. After she left, Lena and I went to the park because the weather was bright and the apartment felt too cramped for both of us and all the unsaid things. At the playground, Lena climbed the slide and raced other children for a while, but eventually she tired herself out and came to sit beside me on the bench, cheeks flushed and hair messy. She asked in a quiet, careful voice whether it was true that Mommy had a boyfriend before me who might be back now, because she had heard Kara mention it in a hushed tone at a family gathering. I told her that before I met her mother, there had been other relationships, but that adults sometimes made mistakes when they mixed old memories with current promises, and that whatever was happening, none of it was her fault. She asked if we were going to stop being a family, and I answered honestly that our family might change shape, but that my love for her would not, that I would still be the one making breakfast and checking homework, no matter what. As we spoke, I noticed two other parents at a nearby bench look over at us more than once, their voices dropping when they said the word anniversary, and I realized that the story from the rooftop had already traveled further than our table. That afternoon we went to Margaret and Gerald's house for a lunch Tessa insisted would smooth things over. But the moment I stepped into their dining room, I knew the meeting was not really about healing, it was about assigning blame. Margaret greeted Tessa with open arms and a flood of soft words about passion and mistakes, then turned to me with a cooler smile that did not reach her eyes. As we sat at the table, plates of food untouched in front of us, Margaret began to talk about how everyone says things they regret when drunk, how Tessa had simply been too honest about her feelings, and how a good husband would understand that a woman like her daughter needed space to remember who she had been before motherhood and marriage. She said that hanging on to one night of chaos was petty, that men who truly loved their wives forgave them when they stumbled, especially if the stumble came with entertainment for a crowd that would forget about it in a week. I listened and felt each sentence lodge itself in my memory, not because I wanted to use her words against her, but because they revealed exactly where her loyalty sat when forced to choose. Tessa retold the rooftop story, leaving out the parts where she described ongoing meetings with Colin, framing it as a drunken exaggeration meant to get laughs, and she suggested that if I had joined the jokes instead of walking away for air, nobody would have taken it so seriously. Gerald tried to keep the tone light, saying that some marriages needed a little drama to stay alive, but even he shifted in his seat when Lena, who had been drawing quietly at the corner of the table, stood up and asked why grown-ups kept talking about Mommy's old boyfriend at family events. The room fell silent for a long moment, and Lena, sensing the tension, asked directly if we were going to live in different houses now like one of her classmates whose parents had separated. Margaret quickly told her not to talk like that, saying that adults were handling things and that she was not allowed to take sides, then added that she herself would not take sides either, because both Tessa and I were too stubborn to see reason. I looked at Lena's face as she processed these mixed signals, and I felt something inside me settle into place, solid and final, like a door clicking shut. I told her gently that grown-ups were having serious talks and that whatever happened between me and her mother, I would still be her father every day, then asked her to take her drawing into the living room and add more colors so she could show me later. When she left, I excused myself to the hallway supposedly to take a call, and there, with my back against the wall, I opened the follow-up thread on my phone and typed a short summary of what had just been said. Rooftop confession framed as joke, Margaret insisting forgiveness, Lena asking about different houses, as a grandmother vowing not to take sides. I saved the message and then immediately deleted the notification from my screen so that if anyone glanced at my phone, they would see nothing but the lock screen and the time. Later that week, standing in the school pickup line, I felt the fracture inside the family reflected in the wider world. Two mothers behind me whispered about a video they had seen, about a woman who confessed cheating with her ex at her anniversary dinner while her husband sat there, and one of them wondered if the man was as cold as the story made him sound. They did not realize I stood only a few steps away, listening to my life reduced to a rumor, until Lena came out of the building and ran to me, hugging my waist. She glanced over her shoulder at the whispering mothers and asked on the walk home if people were angry at us, if we had done something wrong, and I told her that some adults like to talk about other people's problems because it made them feel less lonely in their own, but that we were going to focus on her homework and her bedtime story instead. That night, back at home, as I marked upcoming school events on the wall planner, Lena wandered into the kitchen and stood quietly beside me. She pointed at the red circle around our anniversary date, then at the line where the month ended, and asked in a soft voice if that red circle was the day our family started breaking. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed on the counter with a muted vibration, showing a missed call from the contact saved as private, and I let it ring out, knowing that when I did answer, it would no longer be to ask hypothetical questions about processes, but to speak about a path I had already decided to walk. In the week after that lunch at Margaret and Gerald's, something in me moved from quiet confusion to a calm, deliberate kind of preparation, the same shift that happens at work when a vague concern turns into a documented case. One morning, I booked a short meeting with HR, framing it as a general conversation about long-term planning, benefits, and what might happen if living arrangements ever changed in the future, careful to keep my tone neutral and my words non-threatening. In the small HR room, with its glass wall and polite posters about wellness, I listened as the representative explained how health coverage worked if parents lived apart, how emergency contacts could be updated, how work schedules might flex around custody time, and I wrote everything down in a small notebook I had brought from home. I never used the word divorce, never mentioned Colin, never described rooftop confessions. Instead, I spoke only about stability for Lena, about wanting to understand options just in case, as if I were asking about a theoretical scenario for someone else. After the meeting, I walked down to the underground parking area beneath the office, a cool concrete space that felt safely separate from gossip and anniversary videos, and I sat inside my car with the engine off, the silence wrapped around me. I put on my headphones, opened the contact saved as private, and started a call that I mostly spent listening to, not talking, letting a calm voice outline processes and steps that existed for people who had reached the same point I had reached. The voice asked about dates, patterns, responsibilities with Lena, housing, and income, and I answered in the same measured tone I used when explaining a compliance audit, each answer another line in an unseen report. When the call ended, I wrote a specific day and time on the last page of my notebook, circling it once, then put the notebook back in my briefcase without glancing at it again. That night, at home, I cleared off the small desk in our living room and laid out 3 clean binders, labeling them with my usual tidy handwriting: Home, Auto, Bank. Inside the home binder, I added a thinner section labeled Utilities and began slipping printed statements into plastic sleeves, not only for electricity and water, but also for ride shares, restaurant charges, and hotel bills that matched the dates of Tessa's new honesty, each page slid in without comment. On my laptop, I opened our email and downloaded key messages, then scanned a few important receipts, watching a small notification pop up saying file uploaded successfully as the documents landed safely in 2 separate folders I had named Archive A and Archive B. When Tessa walked past and saw the binders, she laughed and said only someone like me would turn a marriage into office storage, and she told a friend over the phone that I was collecting files instead of feelings, confident that this made her look passionate and me look cold. I did not argue. I simply closed the home binder, placed it on the shelf, and went to the balcony once more, headphones on my head, taking another short, low-voiced call with the same private contact, confirming the date I had circled and quietly repeating the phrase temporary stability for Lena. Later, in the kitchen, I opened a cabinet door and stuck a small yellow note on the inside where only I would see it, with 2 plain words written across it: Bring forms, a reminder that the next time I walked into certain rooms, I would not do it empty-handed. The following morning, as Tessa stormed around the kitchen complaining that I was distant and acting like a stranger, I told her in a steady voice that I was finished arguing in circles, that from now on I would handle things properly, through the channels that exist for situations like ours, and that Lena's routines with me would not be negotiable. She called me dramatic and controlling, said I was trying to scare her, and slammed the front door on her way out to another clearing her head outing with Kara. As the echo faded, my phone, resting near the sink, began to vibrate with a soft buzz, and I looked down to see an alarm sliding across the screen with a label I had chosen days earlier, 2 small words that now felt heavier than any shout. Paper drop, glowing quietly as I tapped it off and turned back to the stack of dishes waiting in the sink. The day that label finally matched reality started like any other school morning, with Lena's sleepy footsteps on the hallway floor and the familiar rush of packing her backpack, checking her homework, and making sure her favorite pencil case found its way into the front pocket. I moved through the routine with extra care, tying her shoelaces a little more firmly, smoothing her hair one more time than usual, because I knew that later I would walk into a very different kind of building for a very different kind of task. After I dropped her at school, I drove to my parents' house and watched as she ran into Ruth's arms, chattering about art projects and playground games, and Ruth gave me a long, searching look that said she understood more than I had told her. I told her quietly that I would be back for Lena according to the normal schedule, and that there might be papers in motion by then, papers meant to keep Lena's world as steady as possible, and Ruth only nodded and squeezed my hand. From there, I drove downtown to the office tower where I worked. But instead of going up to my floor, I walked into the high open lobby with its polished stone and tall glass windows, and I stopped near a column that gave me a clear view of the entrance. The process server, a man I had met only once before, approached with a small nod, carrying a folder in his hand rather than a briefcase, and we quietly confirmed the details we had already discussed on the phone. Tessa's full name, the approximate time she planned to arrive, and the fact that I would stand back and let him do his job. Inside that folder was the thing my notes and binders and saved videos had been building toward, a divorce petition that laid out, in calm lines of text, the pattern of her relationship with Colin, the public rooftop confession on our anniversary, the family meeting where she minimized it, and the ways all of this had touched Lena's life. Along with it were temporary orders for custody and possession, written to keep Lena's primary residence with me in our apartment for now, based on the records of school pickups, bedtime routines, and the thick stack of statements in my home binder, plus a temporary financial plan that ensured her needs would be met regardless of Tessa's moods or nostalgia. When Tessa finally came through the revolving doors, she was not alone. Margaret walked beside her, speaking quickly, and I could tell from their gestures that they expected a difficult conversation where I would once again be asked to forgive for the sake of appearances. They did not see me at first, because the process server stepped forward from the seating area and addressed Tessa by her full legal name in a clear, professional tone that cut through the lobby murmur. For a second, she looked around as if someone were playing a joke, then focused on the envelope he held out and the words he spoke about service of a petition for dissolution of marriage and temporary custody and possession orders. Margaret reacted faster than her daughter, her voice rising as she told the man this was ridiculous, that my behavior was vindictive, that I was destroying a family over one messy night and some old feelings. But the papers did not argue back. They simply sat in Tessa's shaking hands as she tore open the envelope. I watched from my place by the column as her eyes moved over the first page, seeing phrases like recorded anniversary admission, ongoing contact with former partner, repeated public humiliation of spouse, and impact on minor child, followed by lines about temporary primary residence with the father and continued occupancy of the marital apartment by the same. She looked up at me then, her face a mix of outrage and disbelief, and asked how I could do this to her, how I could make her look like the villain when she had only been honest about her feelings, how long I had been planning this attack while pretending to stay calm. I stepped forward just enough to be heard and told her, in the same steady voice I had used in our kitchen, that I had not created these events. I had only written them down, that I was done being the punchline of her stories, and that from this moment on, everything about our marriage and about Lena's schedule would go through the court and the orders she was holding. Margaret started to argue again, saying no judge would believe I was the better parent. But Gerald, who had hurried in behind them and now read over her shoulder, went silent as his eyes moved down the page that described who had attended school meetings, who had been home most nights, and who had turned an anniversary into a stage for confession. The process server checked his watch, noted something on a small form acknowledging the time and location of service, and stepped back, his part complete, while the lobby's ordinary sounds slowly returned. Elevator bells, quiet conversations, the faint clack of shoes on polished floors. I felt a light touch on my shoulder and turned to see my father, Peter, standing a few steps behind me, his face calm but his eyes bright with a complicated mix of sadness and pride. And behind him the glass doors reflected a slice of the street outside, full of people who had no idea what had just shifted inside this building. I told Peter that the papers had been served, that temporary orders were in place for the apartment and for Lena's routines, and that from here everything would follow the process, not the gossip. Then I looked one last time across the lobby at Tessa, still gripping the documents that finally gave shape to the consequences she never believed would arrive, and I turned away, walking toward the bright glass doors and the noise of the street beyond, leaving the rest of the story to unfold on pages and in rooms where performance did not matter, and where my calm voice would carry all the weight it needed without ever rising.